Hello again. Essay here. A few days ago, not too far from where I am, up there in Thousand Oaks, there was a protest going on. And this old guy, Paul Kessler, he showed up at the protest, except he wasn't, how can I say it nicely? He wasn't on the side of the people who were protesting, for Palestine, Hamas, whatever. No, he was protesting for Israel. And according to most witnesses, he had a little Israeli flag with him too. And according to multiple witnesses, someone on the Hamas Palestinian side hit the guy upside the head with a bullhorn. And according to witnesses, he fell down, hit his head, taken to the hospital, and he later died. And he was only 69 years old. Now, of course, you probably say, well, did John Law do anything about it? Well, at the time I was making this video, they are investigating, and they do have a suspect, but no arrest have been made. But this video is not about Paul Kessler. I'm not here to sing his eulogy. No. This video is about the long, bad history of humans behaving badly. Before we get started, I have to sell you something. Has sex lost its fun? Does Netflix and chill more like boring and no chill at all? Well, guess what? I'm not just some fool who complains about stuff on the internet. I also am a published author, and I have 2 books just for you. Glitch, A Precarious Duo, and Glitch, The Future is Unwritten. And they're both available right now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other fine bookstores. And I won't bore you with all the details. Let's just say that if you like Thelma and Louise, or if you're from my generation, you have fond memories of Vanishing Point, then believe me, you'll enjoy a Glitch. Yep, I'm no shit. And wait for it, I got more books coming down the pike. So, if I don't get run over by a train, you'll be seeing those books pretty soon too. Now, back to the video. Now, of course, you say, what does that do with Mr. Kessler? Well, Mr. Kessler's death was in a microcosm, a symptom of a much bigger problem. Because the 2 groups were basically arguing about who has the right to that piece of real estate in the Eastern Mediterranean. Is it the Jews or is it the Muslims? Now, of course, some people will say, oh, it's too complicated. It's a complicated history. They'll say, oh, it's a real political minefield. You can't really talk about it. It's just going to make people angry at you. Yeah, well, I'm undeterred. Because while some people will try to focus on the here and now, in other words, Hamas does something or Islamic Jihad does something, and then the Israeli military does something back, I mean, this seesaw kind of behavior, it's just a symptom of a much bigger problem. Because anyone who is a student of world history, human history, knows that this kind of mess has been going on for a very long time. And not just with Jews and Muslims. In fact, if you go far back in time, back during the infancy of the human species, there's been instances where funny things have happened. For example, if you talk to a bunch of anthropologists, they'll tell you right to your face if you ask them, what happened to the Neanderthals? And they'll make up a bunch of different excuses. They say, oh, Neanderthals, they just died out. Or they'll say, oh, the Neanderthals, they suffered from some kind of disease. Or they say, oh, Neanderthals, they froze during one of the ice ages. Except that people, smart people, people who are, how can I say it nicely, don't have any real skin in the game, they'll look at these excuses and they find it kind of short shrift. They say, wait a second, how is it that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, modern humans, were living side by side for several thousand years, and yet one species died out and one species didn't? Well, since there was no written records back then, I mean, people didn't have like camcorders back then or the internet, so that they couldn't like make a record of what actually happened to Neanderthals. But people who are honest can probably guess what happened. The Neanderthals were probably in the way, and the Homo sapiens said, guess what? Get the fuck out. And of course, since we're dealing with mug and ugh, they probably couldn't email each other and with a bunch of nasty emojis. No, they probably sold it old school, with sticks and stones, since no one had AR-15s and AK-47s back in those days. And in all likelihood, that's what happened. The Homo sapiens killed off Neanderthals, wiped them out. And since there was no written records, well, there you go. And then, of course, it didn't stop there. I mean, anyone who remembers the Punic Wars, where the old Romans were taking on the damn people in Carthage, history books tell us that the Romans weren't just satisfied with beating the people of Carthage on the battlefield. They wanted these people gone forever. And therefore, they rolled into their city-state, killed all the people, burnt the city to the ground, and then sold the ground with salt. Sort of like insult to injury. And of course, the history books don't stop there. Oh, no. No. There's been a lot of really bad news stuff. I mean, for example, the Romans did something similar during the Third Roman-Jewish War. I think that happened, in the 2nd century. Yeah, the Romans went crazy and killed a whole bunch of Jewish people. And then, of course, it happened again when Isabel and Ferdinand, the people who sent Columbus on his little trip to America, they did something similar to the Muslims and, wait for it, the Jews. Yeah, they were living side by side. And you say, wait a second, really? Yeah. No joke, no bullshit. If you look at the history books, there was a period, particularly during those caliphates, and I ain't talking about the ISIS caliphate. No, I ain't talking about those brothers. We're talking about the old school caliphates from back in the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century. Yeah, back in those days, the Muslims, now I will concede, yeah, there was a kind of hemming and hawing, but for the most part, the Muslims left the few Jews that were left in the Middle East alone. Yeah, there was that one little incident in Medina where Muhammad himself kicked out some Jewish tribes, but supposedly they allegedly had a handshake agreement, and the Jewish tribes allegedly, reneged on it, and Muhammad said, "Get the fuck out." So there you go. But yeah, by the time Ferdinand and Isabella showed up, uh, they basically said to the Moors, well, to get the fuck out of Spain, and then told the Jews to get the fuck out of Spain too. And then you say, well, what do you expect? They're Catholics. But of course, the funny thing about that incident was that, because I remember reading about this story, and I thought it was pretty funny, because the Moors, they weren't just living side by side with the Jews in Spain, just out of happenstance. No, the Jews were there for a reason. Why? Because according to the history books, there was a library in Alhambra. And no, I'm not talking about Alhambra in California, no, Alhambra in Spain. Problem is, this library was full of all these old Greek and Roman, knowledge. Problem is, the Muslims couldn't read the script. But guess what? The Jews could. Why? I guess because they're smart. And they were like multilingual. So the Muslims brought these Jewish scribes to Alhambra, and their job was to translate all that Greek and Roman knowledge into Islam, or I should say Arabic. Yeah, Arabic. But then, of course, Ferdinand and Isabella showed up, kicked the Jews and the Moors out, and then, according to the history books, they took the Library of Alhambra and, well, let's just say, can you spell three-alarm fire? Yeah. Well, there you go. But anyway, yeah. And there was other bad news incidents as well. Like, for example, Oliver Cromwell. Yeah, that dude took over England briefly after the Civil War. Yeah, he decided to go crazy on the Irish. Why? Don't know. Maybe he doesn't like Irish stew. But he went crazy on the Irish. Killed a whole bunch of them. Just for the hell of it, I guess. And of course, the damn Chinese, yeah, they had they had a problem with all sorts of various ethnic peoples living all over what we now call Eurasia, and they had a tendency to kill a lot of those people, just murder them. I mean, nuts. Like the people in Tibet and the Uyghurs. Yeah, heard of those people? Yeah, believe me, the Uyghurs tangling with the Han Chinese, that wasn't their first rodeo either. And then, of course, all the mess that happened here in North America with the Spaniards. Yeah, Spaniards, they killed a whole bunch of Indians. I mean, look up the history of what happened to the damn Inca Empire and the Pizarro brothers. They showed up there and they just went crazy. Tried to kill everybody. Didn't quite succeed, but not for lack of trying. And then, of course, same here in North America. They had the Indian Wars, where the American army was running around going crazy. Of course, I will concede the Indians fought back. I mean, they didn't call them Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull for nothing. But of course, in the end, the Americans won, so there you go. And then, of course, the Ruskies. Oh, yeah, we can't forget about the Ruskies. Yeah, they had a habit of doing crazy shit. Yeah, they used to persecute, hell, everybody. They used to persecute the Muslims down there in the Transcaucasus. They used to persecute Lutherans, Catholics, and Jews. I mean, ever heard the Articles of Zion? Yeah, look that up sometime. Yeah, that was made up by the Tsar's ministers, basically to, I think the term is blood libel Jews to make it easier to kill them. Yeah, well, there you go. And then, of course, everyone knows about what was going on in the 20th century, you know, with the Germans basically trying to wipe out almost every Jew in Europe, almost succeeded. But of course, it wasn't just them, because, for example, the Ottoman Turks, yeah, they tried to kill all the damn Armenians, almost succeeded. And strangely enough, after the Ottoman Turks lost their empire, all the Muslims that were living in what we now call Southern Europe, you know, like Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece, and some of the other places in between. Yeah, a lot of Muslims that were living there that were left behind after the Ottoman Turk Empire went kaput. A lot of those people got kicked out. Yeah, just ran out of town. Said, fuck you, go away. So, yeah, this kind of miserableness has been going on for a very, very, very long time. And now, right now, people are dying here in the streets of America over what's happening in the Middle East between the damn knuckleheaded Jews and knuckleheaded Muslims. Oh, sorry, Palestinians. Even though, according to the history books, the word Palestinian basically is a weird bastardization of the Sea Peoples. And you say, who the fuck is that? Yeah, well, according to the history books, the Sea Peoples were, and believe me, there's a English guy, Michael Wood, super smart dude. You should look him up sometime. Great guy. Very personable, wrote a lot of books. But anyway, one of his books was about In Search of the Trojan War. He spoke about how in the aftermath of the Trojan War, the Marcini, that was on the winning side, their kingdom fell apart. First, because Agamemnon got assassinated by his family, which I won't get into. But then, according to the history books, there was a famine, and that resulted in people basically going crazy because there was no food. And it resulted in the Sea People. And before you can say Somali pirates, well, yeah, you could say that's exactly what they were like, except they weren't Somali. They were Greek. And they were running around all around the Eastern Mediterranean just raiding parties. But then they went down south to Egypt, and then they got their ass handed to them. The Egyptians beat their asses. But the Egyptians didn't kill them. Nope. The Egyptians said, okay, we'll spare your lives, but you have to work for us now. Or as anyone remembers that famous scene from Captain Phillips, look at me, I'm the captain now. Yeah, precisely. Well, anyway, the Sea People start working for the Egyptians, and they settled them in what we now call, wait for it, you ready? Eastern Mediterranean. And they gave them a new name, the Philistines. And according to the history books, that name Philistine got bastardized more often than a little boy in Nevada, Nevada whorehouse. Yeah. And by the time 15th century rolled around, that name morphed into Palestine. I didn't know that. I have to look it up. And yet, there were Jews and Arabs living there. Remnants of what was the old Judea, or I should say the original Jewish state that was destroyed by the Romans. Yeah, after the Romans packed up and ended up in the dustbin of history, there were Jews still living there. They didn't have a Jewish state, but they're still living there. And they were living side by side with the Muslims. And indeed, if you look at the original Quran, there's a section in there that basically said that people who were people of the book, I mean, I'm not Muslim, so I don't quite understand everything about that. It said they were protected people, which means no, you don't fuck with these people. You leave them be. You let them do their thing. So then you say, so what went wrong? I don't know. But something went wrong. And I think it happened with the 20th century. I think it happened with the aftermath of the First World War, when the British and the French promised a Jewish state. And I think by that time you had various nationalistic, or I should say secular Arabs who didn't necessarily were, how can I say it nicely, good Muslims, who got kind of, butthurt over this. And they said, well, hey, man, what about us? And of course the English and of course the French said, what about you? Fuck you, get the fuck out of here. So then, of course, that butthurt eventually led to the Jews and the Arabs basically arguing and backbiting each other. And then, of course, it didn't get any better after the Second World War, when the United Nations had a resolution creating the State of Israel. And, of course, talking about shitting the bed. I mean, you can go back and look at the original resolution. You can read it for yourself. Because supposedly the English who were sitting there at the time, they took over the real estate after the First World War. It didn't go anywhere. They were supposed to wet nurse the new Jewish and Arab states in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the English didn't do it. Why? Because the English, felt that the UN overstepped its bounds and basically ignored its mandate. So instead of doing the right thing, the English said, well, fuck this, we're leaving. And left the Jews, some of them were there all along, and the Arabs, who were there all along, to look at each other and say, well, now what we do? And then, of course, the two of them said, well, let's just get out our clubs and start hitting each other over the head until one of us ain't standing no more. And that's what's been happening ever since. Now, I will concede, the Jew boys, they've been winning that fight. Yeah, they've been winning that fight in spades. Of course, with the help of good old Uncle Sam. All those American weapons, American bombs, American planes, American tanks. Yeah. Oh, and American money, taxpayer money, can't ignore that. So yeah, various conflagrations that have been happening since the 1940s. Conflagrations that, at least on paper, the Jews should have lost but didn't. Yeah, well, there you go. And now they're arguing again. And then you say, well, here we go again, right? I mean, it's a meme. If you pay attention to the meme meisters on the internet. So how do we solve this problem? And this is, of course, where we really, step into the muck and the mire. Because for a long time, the United States took it upon itself to be the supposedly neutral arbiter, except anyone who's been paying attention, anyone outside looking in, say that, yeah, right, sure. Every time they try to have negotiations, the Yankees always have their thumb on the scale. In fact, they have their thumb, their index finger, and some toes on their right foot on the scales, on the side of the people in Tel Aviv. And of course, everybody else outside noticed, but they were in no position to really complain. So there you go. And then you're surprised that the miserable Arabs who are living in the Eastern Mediterranean had just been getting the shitty end of the stick. And even though the Americans give lip service to, oh, we want peace in that region. We want the two group people side by side, hugging and kissing, and maybe fucking, but maybe not fucking, and singing "Kumbaya." But when you get right down to it, it's all just lip service. They don't really mean it. They never really meant it. I mean, it's like someone once said that when you come dealing with a politician or a bureaucrat, if you want to make sure, if you want to know they're telling you the truth, get them drunk first. Because I remember someone said that about during when George W. was president, when there was a lead up to the invasion of Iraq, and people were saying if you want to know what was the game plan after the invasion, they said if you talk to some of these people that like Dick Cheney or like Rumsfeld or like Wolfowitz, oh Jesus, Wolfowitz, they say you had to get them drunk first, and then they'll tell you the truth. And I remember the joke was that, yeah, if you ask like Wolfowitz, for example, how are we supposed to occupy Iraq? Oh, they'll say, oh, as long as necessary. And then the joke was that, oh, if you gave him a bottle of scotch, then he'll say, oh, maybe 10 to 20 years. And then the joke was, oh, if you got him like really drunk, he'll say, I don't know, maybe 100 or 200 years. Get it? Well, that's the same thing with the damn people arguing over the Eastern Mediterranean. Because despite the Camp David Accords, ones with Jimmy Carter, and the Oslo Accords under Bill Clinton, this was almost like window dressing. It's like someone nibbling around the edges of a shit sandwich. They don't want to take a big bite, just want to nibble around the edges. And then you say, why? I don't rightly know. You could say maybe it was the military-industrial complex. Maybe people felt that wasn't good business to have peace amongst these two groups of people, because then you lose a good market for selling all your overpriced American-made weapons, all those F-15s, F-16s, and all those damn 109 millimeter mobile artillery cannons. So yeah. And then of course some people say, oh, it's an ethnic issue. Some people say, oh, there's a lot of Jews inside the U.S. government, and they basically decided that they don't want to give anything to the Arabs who live there except maybe the boot. But regardless of those presumptions, I think probably the main reason is that the original UN resolution, there was the mechanism for wet nursing these two countries wasn't implemented. I mean, there you go. I mean, look what happened with Sudan, for example. No, everyone paying attention there knows that, yeah, Sudan was partitioned, and initially there was an attempt to wet nurse it, southern Sudan, but then for some reason, I don't know what happened, the United Nations basically either lost interest or their money ran out, but eventually they only wet nursed it for a little bit, and then they walked away, and before you could say achoo, the whole damn thing fell apart, and the people living there started fighting amongst themselves. And then, of course, India, that's another good example, because Lord Mountbatten, yeah, Charlie Boy, a.k.a. the King of England's #1 homie, yeah, Lord Mountbatten taught Charlie Boy everything he knows, but I'm not going to get into that. He sat there and wet nursed the partition of India from the British Raj to the current, Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Of course, back in those days, in the 1940s, it was actually called East Pakistan, so whatever. And he wet nursed it for as long as he could, And even though there was chaos and anarchy, it wasn't really super crazy. I mean, it could have been, but it wasn't. And eventually the two regions were partitioned, and even though there was a lot of mayhem and a lot of death, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And that's what was missing with the Jews and the Arabs in in Eastern Mediterranean. There was no one there to wet nurse the situation, to basically nurse these two babies, baby nations, into adulthood. That way they can behave themselves. Is it too late to wet nurse them? But it depends who you ask. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But I know the current state of things cannot endure. Nope. They can't go on the way they've been going on. Where you have, hotheads on both sides. I know some people don't want to hear that bullshit, but it's true. I know that a lot of people focus on Islamic Jihad, on the PLO, and on Hamas, doing crazy shit. But guess what? Look on the other side. In those early days, before the partition occurred, you had a lot of people on the Jewish side who were doing crazy shit. Look up Menachem Begin. Menachem Begin was a part of a Jewish terrorist group that blew up the King David Hotel, killed a whole bunch of British soldiers back in the 1940s. Never went to jail over that. And that wasn't the only incident. But that was one of the big ones. So yeah. And then of course there was the so-called attrition war that happened in the 1950s. When in that brief period when there was no real fighting happen, there were groups of Jews. Now we don't know if they were military or civilian, but they were creeping into the areas where the Arabs were living and doing their own little mini pogroms. And in fact, I think there was an incident in Jenin that happened in the 1950s that was pretty bad. A bunch of people crept in there in the middle of the night and killed a whole bunch of Arabs, and then creeped out again, and nobody saw a thing. And of course, while the accusation was that the Jews crept in there and did that shit, nobody saw anything. The people who did see something, they didn't live. So what's the cliche? Dead men tell no tales? Yeah, that's right. So yeah, you had hotheads on both sides doing shit to each other. And I'm not going to get into what happened during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon when Ariel Sharon, believe me, I never liked that guy. I always thought he was a scumbag, sat on his hands and allowed the Phalange Christians, who were allied with the Israelis, to go into a couple of refugee camps after the PLO had waved the white flag and said, okay, we're leaving Lebanon, and they packed up and left to go into the refugee camp where the Palestinians were sitting and killed a whole bunch of them. I think it was well over 1,000 people got murdered. Insane. Yeah, so, yeah, the hotheads on both sides have been doing bullshit to each other for a while, for a very long time. But as I said, this shit can't go on forever. No, it can't. It has to end. The only question is, how is it going to end? Well, there's two ways it can end. The people basically, and I'm talking about the good people, people who just want to, be with their wives, hang out with their kids, go to their raggedy ass jobs and watch bad TV, eat their raggedy ass, McDonald's, or maybe not McDonald's, and just want to be left alone. Those people need to get together and say, hey, we got to stop this killing. Nobody's getting nothing out of it except for the Undertaker. He's getting plenty. He's getting our money, and and we're not getting nothing. Those people need to get together and say, we need to stop this. We just need to stop this. Problem is, the hotheads, they don't want it to stop. They want it to keep going. Everybody's dead and everything is all burnt to the ground. And I'm not just talking about the crazy woke leftists here in our zip code, running around with their protest signs and tearing the damn posters off the walls showing the kidnapped Jew boys hanging out there in Gaza City against their will. No, I ain't talking about those knuckleheads. I mean, those people are a bunch of anarchists. They want to destroy everything. No, I'm talking about the actual people who live there. They need to decide that they had enough killing, that they have had enough bloodshed. They need to say, okay, enough, no more, this has to end. They have to decide that. Now, of course, if they can't decide that, maybe the rest of the world needs to step in and basically do what the UN didn't do and wet nurse these two clowns, have them go to separate corners and try to separate the two of them and then wet nurse them and make sure that the two ain't messing with each other. In other words, no more Hamas guys sneaking into the kibbutzes, killing the damn old Jewish ladies who just want to eat their lox and bagels, and no more creepy, whoever those people were, creeping into the Arab villages and killing all the damn old Arab merchants, and settle things. Will that happen? I don't know. But that's only one of two ways this can end. The other way is too horrific to contemplate. Indeed, Anthony Quinn famously said to Peter O'Toole, this was in Lawrence, Arabia, but it's a great line. He said that the sands of Arabia have drank more blood than you will ever know. Which is probably true. Which means that those people on the Eastern Mediterranean, they have one of two choices. They either have to learn to live together, or so help me, they are going to die together. There is no third option. So, Yahoo and you clowns at Hamas and Islam Jihad, if you're watching this video right now, listen to me. You guys have two choices. You got to learn to live together, or so help me, you're going to kill each other and be nothing left but dead bodies and destroyed cities. There's no in between. There's no in between. Well, that's all I'm going to say on the subject. And that's my opinion.